As I roll up to the scene of the crime, I recognize the victim almost immediately. It was my old friend, the DCEU. I'd heard they'd gotten themselves into some trouble lately, but I never imagined I'd find them like this. How did this happen? How did they allow things to get this bad? I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that it wasn't just one bad decision that messed things up this bad. It had to have been like 10 mistakes that killed the DCEU. And unfortunately, this had been rough since the beginning. Even though they would never admit it, the DCEU has always been jealous of its competition. You see, the MCU had had success with superhero movies, the likes of which no one had seen before. They had done things people thought were impossible, namely, successfully pulling off a superhero team-up movie, a little movie you might have heard of. The DCEU wanted to get to their Avengers, the Justice League, as quickly as possible, which led to them doing things that really made no sense at all. Like announcing a Batman vs. Superman movie before they'd even introduced Batman into the movie series. It was also rushed, and that movie wasn't even able to compete with Captain America: Civil War. I mean, come on. If you told me when I was a kid that we would live in a world where a Batman vs. Superman movie would have to change its release date because it was afraid to directly compete with Captain America, I would have told you to take a hike. But that's what happened. And not only did it lose in the game of release date chicken, the movie wasn't as well received either by critics or general audiences. Hey, but at least they had an aesthetic that set them apart, and a director that seemed to have a vision. Unfortunately, though, that wouldn't last either. If we're going to be honest, there are enough mistakes directly tied to the creation and aftermath of the Justice League movie to fill at least 10 videos of its own. So we'll keep it short and sweet. For starters, the studio wasn't happy with how things were going with Zack Snyder, the director, so they were keeping a close eye on him. They'd even gone so far as hiring the guy who directed the first 2 Avengers movies to come in and babysit, Joss Whedon. All of that extra oversight mixed with the tragic passing of his daughter was enough to make Zack Snyder step away from the project. Who could blame him? With no director to finish the movie, they put the babysitter in charge, and with that, Joss Whedon took over directing Justice League. When the movie eventually came out, there was a mess. A Frankenstein's monster of a film. It would be yet another disappointment at the box office, not even making as much as Man of Steel. You don't have to be an expert on movie finance to know that a movie starring Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Cyborg, and Aquaman should probably make more money than a movie that stars the last son of Krypton on his own. Now, all of that would have been bad enough, but there turned out to be a very vocal group of people online that wanted to see the original director's vision of the film brought to fruition. And to make a very long and annoying story short, the fans got what they wanted. It only took about 4 years and ended up costing the studio over $70 million. Sure, it was better than the original version, but all it did was muddy the waters as to what was canon. Plus, that $70 million isn't nothing. But of course, by that point, that had become the answer for pretty much any problem that Warner Brothers had. Just throw money at it and hope it fixes itself. There really isn't much to say here. This is an issue that's become far too common in this dirty town. Gone are the mid-budget films that could be considered a success by bringing in a respectable $50 to $100 million in their theatrical run. They'd all been replaced with just a few movies a year that would need to make those numbers in their opening weekend if they hoped to turn a profit at all. And so though this wasn't a problem that was only theirs, it is for sure one of the mistakes that was made by those in charge of the DCEU. I mean, come on. Who thought we needed a Birds of Prey movie with a budget of over $100 million? And as crazy as it is that they put that kind of money into that project, they had a number of other things planned that they never even got around to making so that they could fail at the box office. The DCEU had a number of movies that had been teased by filmmakers, or in some cases even officially announced, that never saw the light of day. Some probably never made it past the idea stage, and tragically, those were the lucky ones. Margot Robbie was the breakout star of the DCEU, so naturally, they were talking about making a few more movies with her in the lead. Specifically, they'd mention a Harley Quinn vs. the Joker movie and a Gotham Sirens movie, which would have starred Catwoman and Poison Ivy along with Harley Quinn. But neither of those ever got off the ground. And speaking of the Joker, Jared Leto had been in talks to have his own Joker solo movie in the DCEU. Imagine his surprise when they did end up making a Joker movie, but it wasn't connected to his universe at all. Green Lantern Corps was announced in 2016 and led to a ton of fan castings online, but it ultimately went nowhere. Justice League was supposed to be a two-parter, and we already talked about how that barely limped across the finish line in the state it's in. And then we got Ben Affleck directing and starring in a solo Batman movie. Seems like a sure thing. Nah, that project's dead too. A Cyborg movie? Yeah, you'd think they'd want to follow up with that character. Nope. Wrong again. How about the New Gods, which were created by legendary comic creator Jack Kirby? It would have been a great way to set up the big bad for the DCEU Darkseid. Come on. At this point, you know what happened. Hey, how about an Aquaman spin-off about the horrors of the ocean called The Trenches? Okay, so maybe they weren't all good ideas. And all of this pales in comparison to what they did to Batgirl. A finished movie, thrown in the gutter. It didn't even get a chance to go on Max, HBO Max at the time. And as much as Max could serve as a safe haven for some of these DCEU projects, it brought its own set of problems to the table as well. I don't have to remind you what happened back in early 2020. The whole world shut down. It was crazy for everyone. With movie theaters out of commission, movie studios had to make some hard decisions. They could hold off putting out new movies until the theaters opened up fully. They could release the movies to be watched at home either by buying them or renting them or streaming them on a streaming service. Or they could put the movies out in a few theaters that were open, mainly drive-ins, things like that, knowing that they would make nowhere near the money that they usually would have. And then we have what Warner Brothers decided to do, which was choose all of the above. They announced that every new movie that they put out in theaters in 2021 was also going to come out the same day on their streaming service. Day and date releases. For the DCEU, this affected Wonder Woman 1984 and the Suicide Squad. This decision would cause all kinds of trouble. Filmmakers were upset for a number of reasons, some of them so much so that they cut ties with the company entirely. And when it came to the reception of the movies, it seemed, at least to me, that doing this made the films seem less valuable. I mean, why go to a theater where you have to pay $15 a person to see the new DCEU film when you can watch it at home with as many people as you want, as many times as you want, for the price of only one ticket? People just got used to watching movies at home. And even when theaters fully reopened and the option went away to watch movies the same day, people realized that they didn't mind waiting. Disney's kind of found themselves in a similar situation, especially with those Pixar movies. I sure hope they can turn that ship around soon. I'd hate to see them end up like this. Trying to keep up with everything in the DCEU was way more complicated than it should have been. On top of all of the announced and then canceled movies I already mentioned, they also never seemed to know how much of a connected universe they wanted to have in the first place. At first we assumed that it was going to be completely interconnected, but then they put out an announcement saying that, nah, don't expect that. Just a few years later though, they'd totally reversed that and come out saying that it was all connected after all. Things like that would lead us to ask what characters live in the same world as the others. We never even got a clear answer most of the time. And unfortunately, even with the death of the DCEU, this problem is persisting. As we get ready to see a new continuity come to life, we don't know which characters are going to be carrying over, if any. I mean, they announced that they're going to do a second season of Peacemaker, which will have old characters, one of which is Amanda Waller, who is getting her own show in the new continuity. So does that mean that everything in Peacemaker is canon? That could be a problem considering that, and this is a spoiler, we did see the DCEU Justice League at the end of that show. This kind of confusion really shouldn't be something that you're having to deal with when you're starting a new universe. And don't even get me started on The Flash. Its ending has really mucked up the idea of having a clear understanding of what's going on moving forward. If we're going to talk about confusion, there's no getting around Batman. Don't get me wrong, I love The Dark Knight, but for an average moviegoer, there are just too many of him to keep track of. I mean, look, a year before the DCU showed up, we had a Batman. Then a new Batman came around, Ben Affleck, and for years, we got told that he was getting his own movie. So, when a new solo Batman movie finally did come out, you might understand why people who weren't paying that much attention thought that he was a replacement. But then we get into The Flash, and things get even worse. You see, by the end of that movie, we have 3 people playing Batman in the same film. At least Ben Affleck got a chance to say goodbye to the character. That wasn't a luxury that everyone was awarded in the DCEU. If I had to pick one person that had been most hurt by the DCEU, it would easily be Henry Cavill. I mean, he was Superman, and they treated him like yesterday's garbage. After the disappointment that was Justice League, things weren't looking too good for the Big Blue Boy Scout. In 2018, word came down that the long-rumored sequel to Man of Steel had been canceled, and we assumed that that meant that Henry would be out soon too. But it was never confirmed or denied. We had some hope when the character had a cameo in 2019 Shazam, but we didn't see his face, so it didn't really clarify things one way or the other. And like I mentioned before, Superman did show up at the end of Peacemaker, but just like with Shazam, you didn't see his face. It wasn't until October 21st, 2022 when we finally got some confirmation on what was going on with Superman, when he arrived to confront Black Adam in a post-credits scene for that movie. And then 3 days later, on October 24th, Henry Cavill would make it official with a post on Instagram. You could hear the excitement in his voice, letting us know that this was only the beginning. But then, on December 14th, not even 2 months later, Henry would post again, this time letting us know that his time as Superman had come to an end. And for those of us who considered ourselves as fans, the world seemed a little darker that day. So, why was he out? It was really pretty obvious. The DCEU was living on borrowed time, and the higher-ups were prepping for what would come after. On October 25th, 2022, it was announced that James Gunn and Peter Safran would be coming in as the new heads of DC Studios. The job was a messy one for sure, because for DC to move forward, they were going to have to clean up some of what had happened before. But we were left wondering, how much was going to get tossed in the trash before the remodel? On January 31st, 2023, we got a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. A universe-wide reboot. In my opinion, it was the best option. The only option. A fresh start. But like I already said, it's not quite a fresh start really. There's still plenty of strings connecting it to the past, and those strings will no doubt lead to confusion moving forward. That being said though, I was excited to hear about the new projects. The only thing that seemed off was the fact that we still had 4 movies from the DCEU that needed to be released. Shazam, Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And though James Gunn would say the opposite in his presentation, there's no getting away from the fact that DC Studios was essentially telling us that those movies didn't matter anymore. In fact, they were making it pretty clear that you didn't need to be excited about a DC movie until 2025, when we'd get to see Batman and Superman in theaters again in the same year. The DCEU had been on life support before, but now, a big old "do not resuscitate" had been slapped on it as the plug was pulled from the wall. It didn't matter how much James Gunn or anyone else told us that those last 4 movies were amazing. We knew in the big picture, they were nothing but filler. We'd seen the DCEU take a lot of hits, but this was the killing blow. We'd spent the last decade watching the DCEU stumble over itself, making almost every mistake it possibly could. And honestly, it's a miracle it made it as far as it did. So with all that, all I can really say is, sorry, old friend. I'm sorry things weren't different. I'm sorry the executives didn't let the filmmakers follow through on all their visions. I'm sorry the actors got jerked around like dogs on chains. I'm sorry to the audience that had to fight for a version of the movie that they thought they deserved. I'm sorry to James Gunn and Peter Safran for the mess that they're left standing in, something that they didn't make, but will forever be partially blamed for. I'm sorry, DCEU. You deserved so much better. We all did. Well, that pretty much covers it. The 9 mistakes that led to the death of the DCEU. Wait, almost forgot. I did say there were 10 mistakes. How could I forget? Maybe the worst of them all.
Are you sweet-talking me?
I mean, come on. Who thought this was a good idea? Thank you so much for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.